Right. I hope that you are able to see. So we are going to start this chapter. Name of the chapter, The Enemy, from your supplementary book, that is Vistas. And one of the important chapters from which 5 mark questions definitely they come, written by Pearl S. Buck. Right. So yesterday we have done, if you remember, that she got she was the first lady to get a Nobel Prize in. She was the first American woman to get Nobel Prize for literature, right? So she is Pearl S. Buck. So we have done some of the questions. I hope you remember the answers. We'll quickly go through in 1 minute. So Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the Japanese coast. As a boy, Dr. Sadao, he loved to climb pine trees. The chief concern of Sadao's father was Sadao's education. At around 22 years of age, Sadao was sent to America, and he was sent to America to learn everything about surgery and medicine. Right? I hope you remember these all. If you have any doubt, then ask. Next five, for how long Sadao stayed at America. So for 8 years he stayed at America. He returned when he was 30 years of age. He became famous as an expert, an excellent doctor, and also efficient scientist. Right? So remember, expert, excellent, and efficient. Then how was Dr. Sadao a doctor as well as scientist? So he was a doctor, definitely. He was an expert and excellent doctor. Along with that, along with that he was a scientist also, because he was perfecting a discovery that would render the wounds clean, right? So that was Dr. Sadao. Now, why was Dr. Sadao not sent outside Japan with the troops during the war? So he was not sent outside Japan because the general needed him, the general needed his services, and therefore he was not sent outside Japan. So, as you know, yesterday we have done, the general was suffering from an infection, and only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. So, he did not send Dr. Sadao outside Japan with the troops during the war. Now, Dr. Sadao had met Hana at an American professor's home. Right? So, if any problem in these 10, then let me know. We move on to the next five. What had Dr. Sadao ensured before expressing his feelings for Hana? So Dr. Sadao had ensured that she was a Japanese, because Dr. Sadao was a true patriot. And not only that, he was an obedient son also. He took permission of his father, returned to Japan, and married Hana in a truly Japanese way. Right? Then, what unusual did Dr. Sadao and Hana see one day as they were standing outside their house? So they saw that something was flung out of the sea. So when they carefully saw, so it was a man who staggered, and then he fell down and his face was buried in the sand. When Dr. Sadao, before going close to him, Dr. Sadao had the opinion that he was a fisherman who was washed away from the boat, who fell down from the boat by chance. How did Dr. Sadao make out the identity of the stranger? So through face, rags, and then finally the cap he was wearing, on which US Navy was written. What did Dr. Sadao observe upon examining the stranger? So he observed that not only he was shot at the back, but also the sea rocks had wounded this had totally struck the wound badly. So Dr. Sadao observed that, right? If any problem, then let me know. Then we move on to the next
Ma'am,
set. Yes.
ma'am, what is rags?
Rags are the dirty and shabby clothes which are
Okay, ma'am,
worn by,
clothes.
yes, which have become dirty, excessively dirty. Those are, and even torn, shabby. So those are known as rags. Now, how did
Okay,
Dr.
ma'am.
Sadao try to control the bleeding of the wounded man? So he packed the wound with the sea moss that was spread on the beach. Then the dilemma of Dr. Sadao and Hana when they encountered the enemy. So you remember, you have to write everything, right? Do remember that there was a war going on between Japan and America, right? So, and this enemy, this person was he was an American prisoner of war. So Dr. Sadao and Hana were hesitant to help him. So they first decided to throw him back into the sea. They could not do so, right? Being human beings. Then they decided to hand him over to the police in that condition only. They did not do that also, right? Otherwise, naturally, the man would have died immediately. So ultimately, they took the decision to take him home, treat him, and then hand him over to the police. So, as a doctor, Dr. Sadao had to save the life and then hand him over to the police as a patriot, as a Japanese. Is that okay? So, do remember that these are the questions. Along with that, you remember Dr. Sadao's character sketch as it is coming up. Then, what was the reaction of the servants when Dr. Sadao and Hana brought the US soldier home? So, number one, they took up the superstitious part that the man was arrested, he was shot at the back, then he was wounded by the sea rocks, he should die. But at the back of their mind, they had the fear that Japanese police would arrest them if they would be there where American prisoner of war was given shelter. Now, what did Hana ask Yumi to do? So she asked Yumi to wash the wounded soldier. Yumi refused completely because number one, she had never washed any American soldier, definitely, right? So she did not want to wash a white man, and that also such a dirty one, right? Now we are moving further. That what made Hana succumb to the servant's decision? So, what made Hana succumb to the servant's decision? Succumb means to agree to, right? Then you have got no choice. Then you succumb to the decision. Why so? Because Hana was also scared that servants would go out, they would inform the police, and then Hana and Dr. Sadao would come in trouble. So she succumbed to the servant's decision. Right? Then what was the effect on Hana when Dr. Sadao began the operation? So first, let's see next slide, then you can understand. So what was the effect on Hana when Dr. Sadao began the operation? She choked and was about to faint as she had never seen an operation before, and also that chloroform was making her dizzy. So she choked and was about to faint as she had never seen an operation before. So Hana but stood by Dr. Sadao even when she was feeling so miserable. So she choked and was about to faint as she had never seen an operation before, but she stood by Dr. Sadao. Now next thing which you will remember about General, so his name was General Takima. What did Hana remember about General Takima when the operation was going on? So she remembered that General Takima, who at home used to beat his wife so cruelly, would be certainly cruel to the prisoner of war. Right? So General Takima was a cruel person. He used to beat his wife. Then definitely you can imagine that how cruel he would be to the prisoners of war. Right? So Hana remembered. So what we remember now? See, we remember two things. Number one about Hana. So first thing, she was a responsible wife. She did not leave Dr. Sadao even when she choked and was about to faint. Next thing you have to remember that Hana remembered about General Takima, that he was so cruel. So that shows that Hana was a kind woman. So she did not want the person to suffer even though he was American prisoner of war, even though he belonged to the country with which war was going on. Right? Japan and America were at war with each other. What we understand about General Takima, he was a cruel person. So he was a cruel husband also. He used to beat his wife cruelly. So certainly he would be cruel to the prisoners of war. Then, what was the first reaction of the wounded soldier after gaining senses? So when the operation was done, the man's life was saved, and when he came to his senses, when he became conscious, he was terrified when he perceived where he was. He was scared because he understood that he was in a Japanese home. So naturally, the wounded soldier was terrified. He was scared because he was an American prisoner of war. Is that okay? So the first reaction of the wounded soldier after gaining senses, he was terrified. He was scared because he understood, he perceived that where he was, and where he was in a Japanese home. So why scared? Because America and Japan were at war with each other. The name of the wounded soldier was Storm, right? So now you will understand what made Hannah succumb to the servant's decision. So Hannah was scared that servants would go out and they would inform the police, and Hannah and Dr. Sadao would be in trouble. Now remember that Hannah and Dr. Sadao were anyways going to tell the police, but they wanted to tell the police after the life of that American soldier was saved. Right? Then effect on Hannah when Dr. Sadao began the operation. So she choked, she was about to faint, right? But she stood by the side of Dr. Sadao. Now, what did Hannah remember about General Takima when the operation was going on? So, Hannah remembered that General Takima was so cruel that he even used to beat his wife at home. So, she was worried that General Takima would be so cruel to the prisoners of war also. What was the first reaction of the wounded soldier after gaining senses? His first reaction was he was terrified. He was scared. When he perceived where he was, when he realized that he was in a Japanese home. Because America and Japan were at war with each other. Name of the wounded soldier was Stone. Anything you want to ask in these five, 21 to 25? Any question that is difficult? Then you will
Ma'am,
understand.
this
Yes?
mean,
Yes?
ma'am, what does mean?
What does?
Succumb.
Right, succumb. Succumb, as I said, that when you admit, when you accept certain thing under certain situations. So you can succumb to the pressure, and this is generally a negative word that you succumb. Even it can come as positive in the positive sense only. You remember the chapter the rat trap we had done, right? In that, what happened that when the iron master asked the peddler to come home, he refused, right? But when iron master's daughter Edla came and she requested the peddler to come home, he had to succumb to that request. Why? Because she requested in that manner that he could come and leave as and when he wanted, and also that it would be an honor for Edla and her father if he would come home. So he succumbed to that request. So when you accede to, when you accept certain request or certain pressure or certain any wish or desire under certain circumstances, that is called succumb. Any other question in these five you want to ask? And we move further.
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, why Hana was thinking about General Takima?
Hana was worried. Hana was a kind woman, and when the operation was going on, she was recalling that General Takima is such a cruel person that he used to beat his wife so cruelly. So, when at home to his wife he was so cruel, she was scared and worried that he would be so cruel to the prisoner of war, to the enemy who belonged to America, because America and Japan were at war with each other. Therefore, Hana was remembering that what General Takima would do with this American prisoner of war. Right? We move further. Now, what did Hana think when she saw the general's messengers at the door? So, do remember that for 6 days the servants were along with Hana and Dr. Sadao, and they did not help Hana and Dr. Sadao at any cost. But on seventh day, servants left in the morning. On seventh day, in the evening, general's messengers came at home. So when the general's messengers came at home, Hana thought the servants had
Ma'am,
informed. Yes,
ma'am, my sibling is trying to join the class, but she
it is
can't.
auto join. It is auto join.
But she's saying that she can't join.
This is auto join actually. So because I have not kept, because I'll not get the request also, because I have kept auto join on. So ask her to again go back and then again join,
Okay, ma'am.
right? Because that I can't do. Now this I will be correcting later on. On seventh day, servants left in the morning. And in the evening, the general's messengers came. This is came, I'll correct that. Hana thought the servants had informed about the enemy in their home. So, on seventh day, servants left in the morning. In the evening, the general's messengers came home of Dr. Sadao. Hana was scared. She thought that servants have naturally left the job, right? So they had informed the police that there was American prisoner of war in their home. But actually, the reason was different. Why had the messengers come to Dr. Sadao's home? Whose messengers? The general's messenger. Which general? General Takima. They had come home because the old general was in pain again. So he was again having the problem. As I told you, he was having the problem, the infection, and only Dr. Sadao knew the treatment. Now the old general needed the services of Dr. Sadao, so the messengers had come to Dr. Sadao's home. Now when Dr. Sadao went over there, he treated the general and he also informed Dr. Sadao that there was an American prisoner of war in their home. So he himself told Dr. Sadao. Now, why did the general drop the idea of arresting Dr. Sadao for sheltering the enemy? Now, do remember Dr. Sadao was a patriot, right? So, when he went over there on seventh day, when they had brought the enemy home, he informed the general that there was an American prisoner of war in their home. Now, the general did not even think of arresting Dr. Sadao for sheltering the enemy, for keeping the enemy in their home, because he was scared that if Dr. Sadao were punished to death, right, then naturally, who would have his operation? Who would do his operation? Number one, and also do remember that General Takima was scared also that Dr. Sadao, when he would do operation, he would cause some harm to him. To whom? To the general. So the general did not arrest Dr. Sadao. He did not want to offend Dr. Sadao at any cost. Why? Because he was a selfish, he was a self-obsessed fellow. He wanted that his own life should be safe, and for that, the love for the nation was secondary for him. What did Hana think when she saw the general's messengers at the door? So Hana thought that the servants who had left the job on the seventh day in the morning and the messengers came in the evening, Hana thought that the messengers had come to arrest Dr. Sadao. But why had the messengers come to Dr. Sadao's home? They had come to Dr. Sadao's home because the old general, General Takima, was in pain again. He needed the help of Dr. Sadao. Why did the general drop the idea of arresting Dr. Sadao for sheltering the enemy? So, why did the general not arrest Dr. Sadao? Obviously, because he needed services of Dr. Sadao, he needed help, and he knew that only Dr. Sadao could treat him, and also he was scared that Dr. Sadao could cause him some harm during any operation. Then what promise was made by the general? This is coming on the next slide, but you know the answer. The promise he made was that he would send his armed men, and the word given in the chapter is assassins, coming from the word assassination, that is murder. So he promised that he would send his armed assassins to Dr. Sadao's home to pick up the American prisoner of war. And how many nights Dr. Sadao waited? So as I told you, he waited for 3 nights. As we are doing over here, the promise made by the general that he would send his armed men or assassins to help Dr. Sadao get rid of the enemy. How many nights did Dr. Sadao wait for the general's promise to be fulfilled? He waited for 3 nights. And finally, he arranged for a boat, clothes, food, and a flashlight. So before we proceed, this is the 21st question, which we'll again revise. What made Hana succumb to the servants' decision? So Hana was scared that the servants would go out and they would complain against Dr. Sadao and Hana for sheltering the American prisoner of war in their home. The effect on Hana when Dr. Sadao began the operation. So she choked, she was about to faint, but she did not leave Dr. Sadao alone. Then, when the operation was going on, Hana remembered that General Takima was so cruel that he even used to beat his wife. So she was scared that he would be naturally too cruel to the American prisoner of war. The first reaction of the wounded soldier after gaining senses, so he was terrified because he perceived that he was in a Japanese home and America and Japan were at war with each other. The name of the wounded soldier? Tom. Remember, now this can come as a diary entry. Remember, this can come as a letter also. Suppose Tom is writing a letter to his friend after returning to America. It can come like that. So you have to remember the name Tom. Then what Tom felt, that you have to start from this point, that I gained my I remember that I was shot at the back and somehow I fell into the sea. I don't know that where did the sea throw me. And then finally, when I gained my senses, I found myself in a Japanese home. I was truly terrified. And then I could understand that the persons there did not mean any harm to me. I realized that the person was a doctor who saved my life. Right, like that. And then later on, the story would go. So remember, it can come as a diary entry, it can come as a letter also regarding Tom's part. Right? If any doubt, then ask. When Hannah saw the general's messengers at the door, she was scared because it was on seventh day that the servants left the job in the morning and the messengers came to Dr. Sadao's home in the evening. But the messengers had actually come to Dr. Sadao's home in order to take him to General Takima, who needed Dr. Sadao's services. Dr. Sadao told the general that there was an American prisoner of war in his home, but the general did not take any action at all because, number one, he needed the help of Dr. Sadao, and secondly, he was scared also that Dr. Sadao could cause him any harm during the operation. But he certainly made the promise that he would send his armed assassins, armed men, to pick up the American prisoner of war from Dr. Sadao's home. But Dr. Sadao waited for 3 nights. He could not, he could not get any help from the general, and so he decided to help with the enemy escape. So that means at this point he rose above the borders and boundaries of nations. At that time he remembered the message of humanity above all, wars and fights and all types of. You remember the green wars with gas and fire in the poem Keeping Quiet. So Dr. Sadao rose above all these borders and boundaries, right? Then why did Dr. Sadao give a flashlight to the American soldier? He gave a flashlight, right, sort of a torch, if his food ran out before he got a boat safely. So Dr. Sadao gave him a flashlight so that he could blow the flashlight in case he needed food before he got a boat safely to America. And then to the general, Dr. Sadao, what did Dr. Sadao tell the general about the enemy? He said that the enemy escaped. He gave a simple statement that the enemy escaped. How did the general defend his action of negligence? The general said, the general did not in fact react at all, and he said that he defended, justified his action of negligence. He said he was suffering so much that he forgot his promise. Which promise? To send his armed men, armed assassins, to pick up the American prisoner of war from Dr. Sadao's home. Right, so general justified his action of negligence. So what we remember, he's careless, he's irresponsible, he's negligent also, he's self-obsessed also, right, he's selfish also. So all the things you have to remember, how selfish, he did not send Dr. Sadao with the troops during the war. Right, then he did not take any action against Dr. Sadao because he was a selfish, self-obsessed kind of person. And on top of that, he defended his action also of negligence because he said that he was suffering so much that he forgot his promise. And then this 35th question, it again comes as even a 5-mark question. So do remember, the general murmured. The general simply said in a very slow voice, "You are a good man. You will be rewarded." Right? Because the general had no response. The general had no naturally answer, that no reply why he did not send his armed men. But for Dr. Sadao, what was the real reward? For Dr. Sadao, the real reward was that he saved the life of a human being despite any human or man made borders, boundaries, right? Wars between nations. He rose above all these kind of man made circumstances, and he saved the life of a human being despite anything. That was the real reward for Dr. Sadao. So, what arrangements were made by Dr. Sadao to let the enemy escape? So it was a boat, some clothes in it, right? Some food definitely, and he gave a flashlight also. Why did Dr. Sadao give a flashlight to the American soldier? So that if his food ran out, if his food is finished, he could blow the flashlight and Dr. Sadao could send the food. What did Dr. Sadao tell the general about the enemy? So he told that the enemy escaped. How did the general defend his action of negligence? So the general justified his action of negligence. What negligence? Of not sending armed men to the home of Dr. Sadao to pick up the American prisoner of war. The general defended the action. He said that he was in pain, he was suffering so much that he forgot his promise. Right? So he told Dr. Sadao, "You are a good man, you will be rewarded." But the real reward for Dr. Sadao was that he saved the life of a human being despite any man made borders, wars, right? Any sort of situation that could prevent him from helping the enemy. But he rose above all those borders and boundaries, and he helped the American soldier to save his life. So this is again when we are coming to the part that we have done yesterday. But before that, we will take up a quick revision. You let me know wherever doubt is coming up. So where was Dr. Sadao's house situated? It was situated on the Japanese coast. As a boy, what did he love to do? So he loved to climb pine trees. What was the chief concern of Sadao's father? It was Sadao's education. He was sent to America when he was 22 years of age. And he was sent to America to learn everything about surgery and medicine. Then the next five, for how long Sadao stayed in America? So it was 8 years. He returned when he was 30 years of age. How did Dr. Sadao become famous as? So he became famous as an excellent and expert doctor and also an efficient scientist. So he was a doctor surely, but then how was he scientist also? Because he was perfecting a discovery to render the wounds clean. He was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. Why was Sadao not sent outside Japan with the troops during the war? Because the general needed services of Dr. Sadao because he was suffering from a disease or from a skin infection. Only Dr. Sadao could treat him. Then Dr. Sadao had met Hana at an American professor's home. Dr. Sadao had ensured that Hana was Japanese before expressing his feelings for her. And also remember that he was a responsible son. He took permission of his father, returned to Japan, and marriage took place in a truly Japanese manner. Do remember, it's an important part for character sketch of Dr. Sadao. Then one day when Dr. Sadao and Hana were standing on their veranda, which was naturally the house was on Japanese coast, Dr. Sadao and Hana saw that something was flung out of the sea. So on careful observation, they saw it was a man who staggered and fell. And then his face was buried in the sand. They rushed, before they could rush and find out the identity of the man who fell down. Dr. Sadao thought that he was a fisherman. right? Then Dr. Sadao saw the face and rags of the wounded person and also saw the cap on which US Navy was written. Then he realized that he was a prisoner of war. How could he realize? Because there was a gunshot on his back. So who would be shot at the back? Who would be naturally who would be trying to run away? And who would try to run away? Naturally, who was arrested. So Dr. Sadao could understand that he was an American prisoner of war. When Dr. Sadao observed the stranger, he could understand that not only he was having a gunshot on his back, but also the sea rocks had struck the wound badly. So there was, continuous bleeding. Dr. Sadao tried to control the bleeding of the wounded man by packing the wound with sea moss, which was spread on the beach. The dilemma of Dr. Sadao and Hana. So you have to start from here that America and Japan were at war with each other, and when Dr. Sadao and Hana discovered that the American prisoner of war was in front of them, who had staggered and fallen down, his face was buried in the sand, who had a gunshot on his back. So the dilemma they had, number one, they thought whether they should throw him back into the sea. They did not do so. There was no one at the shore, right? It was already dark, but they could not do so. Secondly, they had the choice of handing him over to the police then and there itself in that condition itself. But that was against the oath of Dr. Sadao as a doctor. So finally, they decided they would take the American prisoner of war home. They would treat him, and then they would hand him over to the police as a they were patriots. The reaction of the servants. So remember the two aspects. Number one, they were superstitious. They thought the person was arrested. He was shot at the back. He fell into the sea. He was struck by the sea rocks. He should die. But actually, they were scared that the Japanese police would arrest them for sheltering or for helping the American prisoner of war. Then, what did Hana ask Yumi to do? Hana asked Yumi to wash the wounded soldier. Why did Yumi refuse to comply with the order of Hana? Because first she had not washed any white man, and of course he was so dirty. Hana succumbed to the servant's decision. Hana could not say anything at all because she was scared that the servants would go out and complain against Dr. Sadao and Hana for sheltering the American prisoner of war. When the operation began, Hana choked. She was about to faint also, but she stood by the side of Dr. Sadao. When the operation was going on, Hana remembered that General Takima was so cruel that he used to beat his wife at home. So she was scared that he would be so cruel to the prisoner of war. When the wounded soldier gained his senses, when he became conscious, he realized that he was in a Japanese home. He was terrified. The name of the wounded soldier? Tom. What did Hana think when she saw the general's messengers at the door? So to start from here, remember that it was on 7th day in the morning when the servants left the job. And in the evening, the messengers came. So Hana was scared that the general's messengers had come to arrest Dr. Sada. But in reality, they had come to take Dr. Sadao with them because this General Takima was in pain again. Then Dr. Sadao told the general about the American prisoner of war in his home. The general dropped the idea of arresting Dr. Sadao for sheltering the enemy because number one, he knew that only Dr. Sadao knew his treatment, and also he was scared that Dr. Sadao could cause him harm during the operation or during the treatment. He made the promise that he would send his armed men, assassins, to pick up the American prisoner of war from Dr. Sadao's home. Dr. Sadao waited for 3 nights. And Dr. Sadao was scared also, right? So he waited. In the morning he would go and he would find Tom alive, happy, right? He was naturally, now that he was gaining his senses, now he was sure that he was safe till he was in the home of Dr. Sadao. Dr. Sadao made the arrangement, so he arranged a boat, kept some clothes in it, some food in it, and gave a flashlight also. So why did he give flashlight to the American soldier? In case his food ran out, his food was finished. So he could blow the flashlight so that Dr. Sadao could arrange to send him food. Dr. Sadao told the general about the enemy after letting him escape that he escaped himself. The general was naturally, he was guilty that he did not help Dr. Sadao, but he justified his action of negligence by telling that he was in pain, he was suffering so much, therefore he could not help Dr. Sadao. He could not fulfill his promise to send armed men or assassins to Dr. Sadao's home to pick up this American prisoner of war. The general murmured and said, "You are a good man, you will be rewarded." To whom? To Dr. Sadao. But for Dr. Sadao, the real reward was that he had saved the life of a human being. He rose above all the borders and boundaries of man-made borders, boundaries, and wars between nations. He rose above all these things and worked in the favor of humanity. You see these chapters in your course, the rat trap, the enemy. All the chapters are giving you the message that goodness always pays. When you are good and kind, it always pays. Right? So always be good and kind. So this is about the chapter. Quick one. So Dr. Sadao with the enemy. So you know that this is how it happened, that they were enjoying the breeze. When they saw that something was flung out of the sea, they realized it was a man who staggered and then fell down, his face buried in the sand. Staggered word, you remember? There was no one on the seashore at that time. Then Dr. Sadao and Hana rushed to the spot and they saw that it was an injured man with gunshot on his back. They saw the cap, US Navy was written. They understood he was an American prisoner of war. Now there was a dilemma what to do with him. They decided to throw him back into the sea or to hand him over to the police, but finally decided to take him home, treat him, and then hand him over to the police. Sadao's childhood, so it was a lonely childhood. His father did not play with him or spend time with him, but he ensured that Sadao got good education and become a doctor. So Sadao went to America. He went at 22 years of age, stayed there for 8 years, and he returned as an excellent doctor, efficient scientist for having perfection in treating wounds. His marriage with Hana, so he met Hana at an American professor's home. He ensured that she was a Japanese. He took immense pride in being a Japanese. He was an obedient son also. He returned to Japan, took his father's permission, and married Hana in a truly Japanese way. Servants fear, so naturally they were reluctant to help Dr. Sadao. They first took up the superstitious aspect that the man was arrested, shot, injured by the sea rocks, that he was destined to die. But actually they were scared that they would be arrested by the Japanese police because they were working in the home where American prisoner of war was given shelter. Hana's role, remember, very loving and caring wife. She supported Dr. Sadao at every step, and even when the servants left the job, she continued helping Dr. Sadao. She was allergic to chloroform. She had never seen the operation also, but she helped Dr. Sadao. General's self-obsession. So he was suffering from an infection which was treated by Dr. Sadao. So first of all, he did not send Dr. Sadao with the armed troops. Next, he did not want to offend Dr. Sadao. He was scared that Dr. Sadao might cause him some harm. Then Dr. Sadao told him also that he was having American soldier in his home. He assured also, but he was so obsessed with his own infection, he never bothered to fulfill his promise. He lacked patriotism, he was irresponsible, he was careless. Dr. Sadao's final decision, so obviously he was a responsible doctor. He had brought an injured American soldier to treat him. He told the general the truth also. He was a true patriot. He even asked help from the general But finally, when the general did not help him, so obviously Dr. Sadao was left with no other option but to let the enemy escape. So he gave him a boat and then few clothes and food and also a flashlight. So Dr. Sadao's decision shows that better side of the humanity where kindness is much above man-made boundaries. Is that okay? So here we will end up the chapter as such. I'll be sharing these questions with you. I will share the question answer file also with you. Prepare it well. If you have any doubt, you can message me anytime. Right? So, and if you have any doubt, ask me anytime. Here we wind up the class.